Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Future Supply Chain Podcast. I'm your host, Santosh Sankar, and joining me today is Matthew Perkins, founder and CEO of Macro Oceans. Welcome, Matthew. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So, we're going to jump into a whole host of things today. I'd love, though, to just level set the knowledge amongst our audience base and ask you to just provide the quick 90-second skinny as to what you and the team are building over at Macro Oceans.
Absolutely. So Macro Oceans is a startup company founded in 2020, and we transform kelp, so that's brown seaweed, into low carbon biomaterials.
Amazing. And kind of what's the Matthew Perkins and Macro Ocean story? How did you kind of get into this world of identifying that kelp could be formed into kind of inputs and different materials that are applicable to a wide variety of processes that we have?
Yeah, so my background's actually in terrestrial agriculture. I spent about a decade working in the seed genetics space, so always bringing high performance, new science, cutting edge science like CRISPR and gene editing and all these things from the lab into the real world. And I realized some years back that we're going to go through this enormous transition away from petrochemicals over the next 20, 30 years. And that literally means that all of the products that power our everyday lives, from surfactants in your soap to lubricants in your engine to most famously plastics, they're all made from petroleum. And these are all going to get remade using bio-based alternatives. And we only have a fixed amount of land that can be put into production for food, where you need to feed people. So how are we going to make all these new materials? And that's when I started to realize that the ocean was kind of the next frontier of supply chains, if you like. We have this opportunity to grow a lot of seaweed. It's 70% of the world's surface, and that kind of was the genesis for the company.
Amazing. And, in the lead up to kind of prepping for this podcast, the thing that I came to find is beauty products have kelp as a key input. And I'd be curious just to kind of understanding that more, but also kind of what led to this discovery that, kelp could be a very good and suitable substitute for a lot of the beauty products that are used within kind of the world of, apparel, retail, beauty today, cosmetics.
Yeah, so the thing that we started out with was, we realized that growing seaweed was not the issue. The issue was transforming it into things that people really wanted. And so we started out by looking at the basics. What can you do with seaweed? What is it good for? And what we realized is that the thing that makes kelp, in particular brown seaweeds, really good for beauty is something that they do themselves in nature every day. So if you're a piece of seaweed, what are you trying to do? Well, you're trying to stay dry and not, dry out. You're in the water. You're trying to protect yourself from loads of sunlight that's hitting you all the time, so UV exposure. And then you're getting bashed around all the time by currents and marine life, whatever, and you're getting scraped and you need to heal yourself. And so these same three things are directly what we can bring to skincare, right? Hydration, you don't want to dry out. UV exposure, so anti-redness, anti-inflammation, calming the skin, and then sort of self-healing, so this kind of, soothing properties for the skin. And so those are all the amazing benefits that we just literally take from the ocean and bring it to consumers.
And, over the holiday, I was mentioning to somebody that I'm going to interview you. And the question they had is like, so how's kelp, is it farmed? Do you kind of find it in certain areas and regions and harvest it? Kind of help us understand, if you would, some of the details and nuances around the kelp supply chain, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's actually where I started out. I was really interested in understanding how the kelp gets grown. And so we only work with aquaculture seaweed, which basically means farming kelp in the water. And we are exclusively at the moment focused on Alaska, because Alaska, it turns out, is a wonderful place to grow a lot of a lot of kelp. So if you think about Alaska, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's this enormous place. It's got 3,000 miles of pristine coastline. It's got a huge and well set up fishing industry that's already got a lot of people who know how to work on the water. It's got a lot of infrastructure. They're used to moving things around on boats and freezing them and processing them and all that kind of stuff. And it's got a state government that sees mariculture, what they call mariculture, which is seaweed and shellfish, as a key engine of growth for their rural communities to provide new jobs, new economic opportunities for these native communities and fishing communities. And so they kind of welcomed us with open arms. And so we're working with a number of different farmers in different regions of Alaska to grow this beautiful crop. It's all organic certified in the ocean, and then we harvest it. So the way it grows essentially is they put out these tiny little kelp seeds in the fall, and they grow them on ropes, and it's in a kind of grid structure. And in the spring, when the days get longer and the temperatures warm up and there's more sunlight, the kelp grows very, very rapidly. So, it can grow up to, 2 feet a day in some cases, but very rapidly turns into these big, long blades. And when the spring comes, they pull them all in, and that's when we take delivery of the crop, and that's when our part of our supply chain moves to us, and we start to work on processing it.
And how large is kind of this industry that farms kelp? Is it relatively new? Has this been something that's existed for quite a while, but maybe it's been underappreciated?
Yeah, so seaweed, as you might know, is a staple of the Asian diet, right? So in Asia, they grow about 30 million wet tons of seaweed every year. The vast majority of that, I would say 90+%, is going into people's plate of food. So, they eat it. If you're in Japan, you eat 20 different types of seaweed a week. It's a mainstay of their culture. In North America, it's a little bit different. People have been looking at it, food applications for the last, I would say, decade, but beyond sort of your typical sushi roll and seaweed snacks, it's not very popular. And so when we started this business, we said, well, what are the real scalable industrial applications that are most interesting, high value, very specifically targeted at unique performance from seaweed? And that's kind of where we focused. But the growing side of it is still nascent. The supply chain is being built. But that's one of the great opportunities from my perspective, because it's greenfield. We don't have to repeat other mistakes that we made in land-based agriculture. We can create all new types of practices and supply chains that are really much more sustainable and traceable than historically what's been offered to major companies that are buying these inputs.
So picking back up kind of where you left off, the crop has been harvested. You have these amazing kind of leafy greens, so to speak. Then you step in. What happens next in order for this to be a ready input into, say, like a cosmetics manufacturing process?
Yeah, so we designed our systems first of a kind, really thinking through the basics from the beginning, the first principles, if you like. We wanted to have 100% utilization, so zero waste. We didn't want to just pluck out a few molecules and then throw the rest away, which is kind of what people tend to do. And we wanted to have it in a low energy, low water usage, low carbon type of setup. So we use all green chemistry, which essentially just means commonly available low pressure, low heat chemicals to process it, natural chemicals. So we take that, we make 3 product streams from it. We make a bioactive stream, which is focused on these high value molecules that deliver the skincare impact that we were talking about for our skincare ingredient. And we're making 2 further products. One is around alginate and the other is around cellulose. Those are a little earlier in our pipeline, but will be coming to market over the next year. So we do a lot of work in our own setup to make sure that we're doing really kind of three things for the customer. So number one is performance. The customer buys performance. It's proven to work. So we have skincare claims. We've done all the clinical testing. The second thing that they're buying really is superior sustainability. So, they want to know that it's traceable. They want to have all of the documentation of that. They want to know that it's made in a clean way. And then the third thing that customers are buying is really what I kind of call manufacturability, or the ability to kind of easily manufacture with our products, right? You cannot tell people they've got to completely change their manufacturing lines or their known systems. It's got to be easy to work with. And then obviously the fourth thing, there's table stakes, is you've got to be price competitive. So those are all the kind of four things that we do to make a really compelling product to the industry. And the uptake's been tremendous.
So you mentioned transparency, right? And this is something that consumers of cosmetics, beauty products have increasingly demanded of the brands that they buy from and are loyal to. And I'd be curious kind of how you think about that. How does that parse into the experience you need to provide, right? As a raw materials vendor to your customers who use it as an input in a broader process, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, it's a new frontier, I would say, for beauty customers, but it's what they're moving to where the consumers are. So consumer trends are really, there are two big consumer trends. One is about cleaning the label. So they want to have, simpler, more recognizable ingredients that they're using. If you look at the back of a face cream, it's an alphabet soup of chemistries that you're like, do I really want to put this on my face? If you're able to swap out a synthetic and you can replace it with a natural product like ours, which is derived from kelp, consumers love that. Then they want to know that it's not only really working on the skin, they want to know that they can feel good about using that and it doesn't have a detrimental effect on the environment. Now, the companies are responding to that by trying to understand the supply chain in much more detail. The honest answer is right now, it's extremely difficult for them to understand where everything comes from. And so when we turn up and we say, well, we can tell you on every single jar that we make, or every bottle that you're using in your manufacturing line, we tell you which farm it came from, we tell you when it was manufactured, we tell you how it was manufactured, and it's fully traceable to your formula. They're like, wow, this is unbelievable. Like, nobody does this for us. And so we've tried to set a new standard, which they can start to ask and of their other suppliers, which hopefully will have a sort of cascading effect as well. But it is it's a really interesting selling point for beauty customers. They really like it.
So the one thing you'd have done or provide to your customers is what I call, you've operationalized the traceability of your materials. How does that practically happen in daily operations? Because I know there are several large organizations that just struggle with that type of table stake ask from their customer base.
Well, we're lucky in that we're a startup and we're building things from scratch. And so when you have an intention in mind, you can be intentional about how you actually operationalize that. But practically speaking, it's really about having that same ethos inside the company to say, okay, guys, when you're sourcing something, you need to know where it comes from. Everything needs to be well documented. We need to have good communications with the suppliers, in this case, the seaweed farmers, so we really understand what they're doing. And we go up there and we work with them during harvest and we understand how it gets put into our supply chain. And then we just track it all the way through. And because we're building things from the beginning, we have that opportunity to do it right, if you like. It's obviously much more challenging if you're bigger and you have established processes and now you've got to retrofit it. It's more difficult, of course, but it really starts with a conversation with the actual suppliers and really telling them what's important to you, right? So these are all important, and we've started from the very beginning saying we want to have good visibility on what the practices are and how it's grown and where it comes from, and traceability, and that's a core part of our ethos.
Are there kind of certain tools you rely on? You mentioned during harvest, you'll kind of go up, stand shoulder to shoulder, kind of through the transportation logistics elements. Are there kind of certain tools you have found to be perhaps more effective, or if not tools, just kind of processes and ways of thinking and culture you instilled in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any one particular tool. So nowadays, there's so many software packages you can just buy and adapt them. But much more important is actually writing down kind of at the very beginning the things that you do want to know and track and the things that you don't mind so much about. Because obviously you can collect data all day. The real question is like, garbage in, garbage out. If you're not
That's right.
intentional about what you put in, you're not going to get the metrics you want for what comes out. And so, we've kind of created a doc that captures the core things that we want to track, and then we make sure those get done. And we're clear about that with our partners. So that's kind of the way that we've done it. And it seems to work pretty well. So we get all the high fidelity information we need about our supply.
So the thing I've come to observe and appreciate is there are a lot of different facets to sustainable and ethical product production, right? And I'd be curious, like, what's your take on the concept of the green premium? And in turn, like, how do you pull that through as you're building your business out at Macro Oceans?
So I actually don't agree that the green premium is something we should really expect. I know it was popularized, Bill Gates and others, but in my experience, if I walk into a room and I try to sell people on you should pay extra for this because it's better for the planet, the people are like, oh, okay, sure. But in the world of high interest rates and inflation, and the difficulty of passing on those costs to the consumer, most people will just look at you and say, well, yeah, okay, it's got to be cost competitive. You have a pricing problem. And so we very deliberately, from the very beginning, we said we're not going to try and charge a premium for this. In fact, we want to be cost competitive from the get-go. We want to take price out of the equation. And we're lucky because the unique way we've processing seaweed was because we're using 100% of the material, we have a margin structure that allows us to be very cost competitive. And so we've kind of taken price out of the equation. It's a no-brainer. We want to make price never a point of friction for using the product. And that allows us to then move to the performance has to be front and center. People are buying performance for our specific products. And then all of the other things are supportive to seal the deal, if you like. And so transparency, zero waste, green chemistry, low carbon, that's all kind of like a wrapper around it, but it's not the primary buying decision, driver of buying decisions for the customer. It is something that very much helps them get over the line, something that they can sell and market and feel good about and have better metrics internally. But it's never the number one. They never lead, we never lead with that.
And the one thing that is interesting is you've been very intentional in saying you don't want any waste, whether it is related to kind of the physical product of the kelp itself or kind of the associated financial implication of that waste. How did you go about that? Kind of how did you kind of break down what we might have taken for granted as kind of a piece of kelp and ensured that you can use all of it when building this product that you sell on to your customers?
Well, I'd like to say there was an easy way to do this, but we spent about 18 months in the lab working on lots of different prototypes because I would say there's no silver bullet here. There's only trade-offs, right? So you have to, there's with any given bio-based feedstock, there's a range of things you could make, and you have to pick what you want to make, and then you have to understand, how much of one you can make versus another, and what your trade-offs are in terms of processing costs and operational costs, and then the market and all those types of things. So we did a ton of work just looking at what our opportunity space was, connecting that with what we could do technically, and then trying to, essentially pick a model which we thought was going to work, and then we launched it. And it's definitely been a work in progress. But I think it's mostly about having the mindset that it is possible and just kind of continuing to iterate and saying, okay, we've got this other stream, what can we do with it? And then exploring and figuring that out with customers.
I love that. That's so fascinating. But with that, I'm going to bring us home here, Matthew. I like to end some of my episodes with a bit of what I call this or that. I'm going to give you two options. You pick an option and explain to us why. Pretty lighthearted. You ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. Let's start with saltwater or freshwater. I think I may know the answer to this.
It's got to be saltwater. Saltwater is the mainstay of the ocean, and that's 70% of the Earth's surface. So, yeah, definitely saltwater.
Spirulina or nori?
Definitely nori. It's a seaweed. The others are microalgae. So, I'm a big sushi lover too. So,
face wash or lotion to bring us home?
We have to go with lotion because, of course, you're going to put big Kelp hydration. That's our product in a face lotion. So, yeah,
I love
definitely face lotion.
Well, with that, Matthew, it's not every day that somebody can join us and talk about how you can rethink kind of a day-to-day product we might take for granted by using a more sustainable and really ethical input, such as kelp. And what you and the team at Macro Oceans are building is super interesting, exciting. And we look forward to experiencing your continued success. Cheerleaders here on the sidelines.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and tell you a little bit about Macro Oceans.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.